afternoon, students, and welcome to today's lecture on sport and society in the ancient city of Athens. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we're moving away from the Panhellenic Games, those events where Greeks from, all over the Mediterranean came together to compete, to start looking at civic games. That is, games put on by a particular city-state, just for the citizens of that city-state in some instances. Now, this is a little weird to think about, right? I mean, could you imagine a Boston Marathon where only Bostonians were allowed to run? Or could you imagine the Phoenix Open where only people from Phoenix were allowed to play golf? I mean, yeah, that probably helped my chances of making the field. But it's a pretty foreign concept in the larger realm of sports culture today. But this was a big deal in ancient Greece, and places like Athens and Sparta, and a whole slew of other city-states all had their own games just for their own citizens. So, whether you're looking to honor the goddess Athena, or just trying to obtain some olive oil for salad dressing, journey with me as we investigate Athens and the Panathenaic Games. Now, when we think of ancient Athens, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably something like democracy, or the Parthenon, or Socrates, something like that. And those are undoubtedly awesome people, places, and developments of the amazing Athenians. But let's not forget about sports either. Throughout the history of ancient Athens, sports played a key role in forming Athenian culture. Building bonds between Athenian citizens and solidifying their worship of their patron goddess. You guessed it, Athena. But to really understand the role of the games in Athens, however, let's step back and build a little bit of context here. So, Athens is located on the Attica Peninsula in Greece. And as you can see here, right, Greece is one giant mass of peninsulas and islands. So, almost everything is relatively close to the sea. And Athens, of course, certainly no different. Now, sites like Olympia down in the Peloponnese and Delphi up in Phocis, homes of two of the most important Panhellenic games, they were pretty far away. So you can kind of see why Athens might have wanted some games, a little closer to home. Now, Athens was founded way back in the Bronze Age, but it didn't really start flourishing until the Archaic period, something around 800 BCE. And over the course of the next few centuries, it grew in power and it became a hotbed for innovation. Then, right around 500 BCE, a couple incredibly important things happened. So, first of all, Athens was the first city-state to develop and employ democracy amidst the chaos that was the late 6th century BCE. Then, very shortly after that, Athens' navy helped lead the Greeks to victory over the Persian Empire. In the aftermath of those Persian wars, that led to the Golden Age in Athens. The 5th century BC saw the construction of the Parthenon on the Acropolis, and the advent of classical philosophy with thinkers like Socrates and Plato. It built a vibrant cultural scene with poetry and drama and theater and sophisticated sculpture and pottery. All these things that we think of when we think of ancient Greece, they come to their pinnacle during the classical period in the 5th century. And it's in this dynamic ecology that we get the world of ancient Athenian sport as well. not as a way to show Athens' dominance over other city-states, although maybe a little bit, but rather as a way to mark it as unique and build bonds within the Athenian community. Now, we've seen in previous lectures that citizens of many of the Greek city-states would have trained in gymnasia and palaestra all over the Greek world. And Athenians would have done this as well. In fact, Athens' gymnasia, the Academy, and the Lyceum, and the Kinosarges, they were some of the most famous in all the Greek world, becoming renowned not just for their athletic facilities, but for their philosophical education that took place within their walls. I mean, can you imagine a workout followed by a chat with Plato at the Academy? It must have been an incredible experience. But Athens' most unique contribution to sports wasn't the everyday activities of its citizens. Rather, it was the games associated with Athens' greatest religious festival, something known as the Panathenaic, or the All Athens Festival. Now, the greater Panathenaic Festival, there was a lesser one too, but we'll get to that later. The greater one happened every 4 years in honor of the patron goddess of the city. And you don't have to have a PhD in classics to guess who that goddess might be. You guessed it, Athena, of course. Now, the festival took place over the course of about a week in the month of Hekatombion, which corresponds to late July and early August on our calendar. And it was held to celebrate Athena's birthday. Now, the centerpiece of the festival was a grand procession, starting just outside the main gates of the city, known as the Dippolon Gate, making its way into the heart of the city, crossing through the Agora, the center of the city for commerce and politics, and then winding its way up the Acropolis to the altar of Athena and the Parthenon itself. But the procession wasn't just for fun. On the occasion of Athena's birthday, they were bringing her a new dress, known as a peplos in Greek. And this peplos was so massive that it had to be brought in on the mast of a ship. And once on the Acropolis, the cult statue of Athena would have been fed in the form of, sacrifices, and it would have been clothed in her new peplos. And in many ways, the statue would have been treated like a living goddess, right? Being kept alive by the people. Now, along with this new dress, 100 cattle were led along the way to be sacrificed to the goddess and provide a feast for the attendees. And fun little fact here, this is actually where the Greek term for that month comes from. Hekatombion very literally means the sacrifice of 100 oxen. Now, this whole thing might seem a little crazy now, but it gives you a sense for Greek religion. Temples were quite literally the houses of the gods. They contained a cult statue that was the embodiment of the god or goddess. And that cult statue needed to be maintained as though it were living. So food from sacrifices, clothing, incense, gifts, all these things would sustain the deity and bring favor to those who offered them. So to sum up here, the Panathenaic Festival, it happened every 4 years in honor of Athena's birthday. And during this festival, a great procession would bring her a new dress, known as a peplos, and the sacrifice of 100 oxen. And then everyone would celebrate the goddess with a set of musical competitions and athletic contests. Now, we don't know for sure the exact progression of events over the course of the festival, but here's one potential reconstruction. It's likely that the events began with musical competitions. So here contestants from all over the Greek world would compete in things like playing the kithara, which is actually the forerunner and the namesake of, you got it, the modern guitar, as well as playing the flute. Then singing competitions would have taken place afterwards, and thank Zeus I was not included in those, because I think the whole Panathenaic Festival, it would have just come to an end right there. Athena would not have been happy with my singing, not even a little bit. Anyway, after the musical competitions, the next day would have been filled with your classic athletic events for boys, those people aged 12 to 16, and beardless youths, those people aged 16 to 20. And these would have included foot races and the pentathlon and wrestling and boxing and all those awesome events that we became familiar with in our investigation of the Panhellenic Games. Then on day 3, it was time for the men to compete, those people aged 20 and older. And they competed in the same sorts of athletic events. Again, with these kind of Olympic-style events, people from all over Greece could join in. Next up, we've got the equestrian events. And here's where things change a bit too. So first off, some of these events were for Athenians only. No outsiders. And second, the events become uniquely Athenian in nature. And what I mean by that is that we start getting events that don't show up anywhere else. And so first and foremost, we've got the apobates. And the apobates began with a fully armored soldier in a chariot. And he would take off and he would speed around the track. And while the horses were racing at breakneck speed, the soldier would have to leap off the chariot very acrobatically and then somehow leap back on. Scholars think that this may have been kind of a callback to the heroes of the Homeric epics, who launched themselves into battle from their speeding chariots, and then back into their chariot, to continue the fight. Honestly, I can barely ride a bike, so along with the musical competitions, count me out of that one too. Anyway, other equestrian events were open to Athenian warriors. These included horse racing, the zoigos, which was a kind of wagon race, and a javelin throw from horseback. And again, scholars have suggested that this may have been indicative of the increasing use of cavalry in Athenian warfare. Interesting link between sport and the development of sport and other things going on in Athenian culture, especially in the realm of military and warfare. Now, next up, we get what's known as the tribal events. Athens at the time was split into 10 tribes, and members from these tribes competed for prestige and prizes against their fellow Athenians. These events included the Pyrrhic dancing, which was a sort of performative kind of combat dance, where teams of dancers would dress up in armor, they would hold weapons, and they would dance and imitate military moves. Another event was the euandria, quite literally the good men. That's what it translates as. And this was sort of a bodybuilding competition where men were judged on their beefiness and their physique. Clearly, this is one that I would win kind of all too easily, so they probably wouldn't even let me compete in that one. Easy victory. Anyway, next on the famous inscription, we've got the torch races. And this was a relay of 10 Athenians from each tribe, and they'd cover the distance of about 2.5 kilometers. They'd be running from the academy, right, the famous gymnasion, up to the Acropolis. And the winner was the first to reach the finish line with the sacred fire of the torch still lit after covering more than 1.5 miles and going through 9 different handoffs from runner to runner. Then we get the contest of ships, which sounds absolutely awesome. We don't know a lot about this, but we think it likely had some sort of boat race, and it was held outside of Athens, probably down at the major port of Piraeus. After the events concluded, there would have been prizes awarded and much feasting and celebration. And one of the super cool things about the inscription detailing the games is that we get that list of prizes as well. And let me tell you that some of these things were very expensive, and the games as a whole would have been incredibly costly to host. Now, if you recall from earlier lectures, the Panhellenic Games were sometimes known as the Stephanitic Games, or the Wreath or the Crown Games, because winners of the events didn't get anything that was materially valuable. Instead, they got a botanical wreath, right, that they were crowned with, and that would give the winner honor and prestige. That was emphatically not the case in the Panathenaic Games. These winners got paid. And what's more, the second place competitor got a prize as well. That's something else that didn't happen at the Olympics. Now, the most common prize is the famous Panathenaic amphora, filled with the renowned Athenian olive oil. Athena became patron goddess of Athens, after all, by giving the gift of the olive tree to the Athenian citizens. And so this was representative of the city and the goddess in kind of more ways than one. So first off, an amphora is a storage vessel for wine or olive oil or some other liquid, right? It's usually made out of ceramics like you can see here. Now, many are rough and crude, and they're made for durability and long-distance transport on ships like you can see here. But the Panathenaic prize amphorae, amphora is the plural of amphora, these were beautifully decorated. Now, on one side, you have the image of the goddess Athena herself. and she's usually clad in her prototypical armor and ready for battle. And on the other side, you have a depiction of the event that just took place. And it's not like you just got one of these things. The number of amphoras of olive oil awarded depended on the event and the age group and what place you came in. So for example, the winner of the boys' stadion got 30 amphoras of olive oil. The winner of the beardless youth stadion got 60 amphoras, and the winner of the men's stadion got a whopping 80 amphoras of Athenian olive oil. Second place of those events would get 1/5 of whatever the winner got. So you better eat a lot of salads to use up all that olive oil. Man, these jokes just keep getting better. Anyway, other prizes existed as well. Gold and silver crowns were given out to the victors of musical competitions and the winners of the tribal events. The Pyrrhic dancing and the manly man contest and the torch race, they all received an ox. The winner of the boat race got a whopping 3 oxen. Beefy indeed. So the prizes of the Panathenaic Games represent something very different than the prizes of the Olympic Games. It's not just prestige that you're getting. It's something worth cold, hard drachmae. And it's worthwhile to think why that is. One suggestion is that this gave Athens a way to gain prestige amongst other city-states by showing off its wealth. And at the same time, it gave Athens a way to show its generosity back to those other city-states by redistributing its wealth to the winners who came from abroad in those common Greek or Panhellenic events. Now, the Panhellenic prize amphoras are undoubtedly one of the coolest artifacts we have relating to sport in the ancient Greek world. But there's no way you can end this lecture without talking about the most famous archaeological remains relating to the Panathenaic Festival. And that, of course, boom, is the Parthenon frieze, a continuous set of sculptural design more than 400 feet in length that tells the story of the Panathenaic procession from the city gates up to the Acropolis. Now, the Parthenon, remember, is the temple to Athena Parthenos, or Athena the Virgin. It sits majestically atop the Acropolis, where it was built in the middle of the 5th century BCE during the Golden Age of Athens. The frieze is located near the top of this structure, inside the peristyle, or the set of columns that surround the temple. If one passed through those columns and then gazed upwards, they would see the story of the Panathenaic procession. Now, the sculpture shows the order of the procession, or at least that's what most scholars think. It begins with the preparation of the horses, which then transitions to the mounted horsemen. And these mounted horsemen, they take up nearly half the decoration. You may have seen pictures of these mounted horsemen if you've ever eaten at a Greek restaurant. They're incredibly popular decoration, and they remain today as one of the best examples of high classical sculpture in all of ancient Greece. Next up, we have the procession of elders, an attribution which is made based on their hairstyle. And these old dudes, well, they were followed by musicians. Both the kithara, right, the namesake for the guitar, and the flute place, both played there. Both of which ended up being events in the Panathenaic Games as well. Following the musicians are the water bearers and the tray bearers, and they bring honey and they bring cakes, and they're helping lead the sacrificial animals to the altar. Then, of course, we get the animals themselves. We get sheep, we get cows, and there are only 14 cows in total. So remember, the hekatombion was the sacrifice of 100 cows. So this must be kind of an abbreviation, right, of the full sacrifice amount here. Now, following the sacrificial animals, we get the priestesses with the sacred objects used in the ritual process of sacrifice. And then we get a series of 10 figures. These were either the eponymous heroes of Athens, the people who gave their namesake to the tribes of Athens, or they were representations of the magistrates and officials who were in charge of the event. And then finally, we get the 12 seated Olympian gods. We also get a series of figures preparing some sort of cloth or garment. And the standard interpretation here is that this is indeed the preparation of the peplos, right? The dress for the goddess Athena. And that the frieze culminates with the presentation of that peplos, of that dress, to the goddess Athena amongst her Olympian brethren. Now, the Parthenon frieze is incredibly important for a couple reasons. First off, it's one of the best preserved and best executed examples of classical sculpture. Second, it gives us invaluable information about the Panathenaic Festival, one of the most important rituals in all of ancient Athens. Third, it's at the center of a modern debate. Much of the frieze was sold to the British, Lord Elgin in particular, back in the 19th century when Greece was under Ottoman rule. Now the Greeks want it back, and they've even dedicated a space in the Acropolis Museum here specifically for that purpose. The Brits don't seem to be too into that idea though. So should it go back? That's up for you to decide. Now, when we studied the Olympic Games, we saw how the modern Olympics have taken the core idea and just become way bigger, way more complex, way more extravagant, kind of way just more complicated, grander expression of what happened with the ancient games. But with the Panathenaic Games, however, it's much harder to draw a modern parallel. I mean, think about it. Can you recall any games that are specific to a given city that focus on the citizens of that city alone? Now, one parallel you might be able to draw for a famous city-specific event might be something like the Boston Marathon. But those types of events, they don't just focus on the citizens of that city. It's not just Bostonians running that marathon. Another option might be something at the national level, right? The national championships in college or pro sports, the NCAA tournament or the Super Bowl or the World Series. But honestly, at least to me, that just kind of feels like too big of a stretch. Their purpose, it's not really to unite the citizens of America, but rather to have fan bases go against each other. So perhaps the closest thing we have to something like this would be something at kind of the high school level, right? Maybe the state championships in football or track or basketball, where it's all people from a relatively local region coming together to compete to be crowned the best at that sport in that kind of geographically limited area. Now, even if that isn't an apt comparison, it's interesting to note how the civic games, an incredibly important event in ancient Greece, seem to have declined in importance in the modern world. Perhaps that's because we've separated sport from religion and politics a little bit more than occurred in antiquity. Or perhaps it's because cities and states are less independent than the ancient Greek city-states. Either way, I'd like to see the Great Tusonia Festival one of these days. Sign me up for that one. All right, so you've made it to the end of another episode. Now, in this lecture, we have taken a look at sports and athletics within the city of Athens. And we've seen that these events and rituals, they played a powerful counterpart to the Panhellenic Games at sites like Olympia. The most important of these rituals was known as the Panathenaic Festival, or the Panathenaic Festival. And this was celebrated every 4 years in honor of Athena's birthday. And in addition to getting a new dress and sacrificing 100 cattle, this festival included a huge array of athletic competitions. Now, some of those, like the foot races and the combat sports, they were really similar to the Olympics. And all Greeks, right, from whatever city-state they came, they were allowed to compete. Other events were uniquely Athenian, like the apobates, where soldiers would majestically jump on and off of speeding chariots. And only Athenians were able to compete in those. Now, these games were crucially important in ancient Athenian culture. They built bonds between its citizens, they showed off its wealth and prestige to its neighbors, and they highlighted its generosity with the richness of its prizes. So next time you're in Athens, make sure to take a little olive oil home with you, in an amphora. And don't be afraid to call yourself a champion. Just a couple lessons you can learn from Athens and the Panhellenic Games.